So what I want to talk about today, which I only learned a few months ago, is about something called Solomon's paradox. What Solomon's paradox does, it actually explains why so many of us uh, are able to get so much value out of coaches and advisors, and whether it be a business coach, personal life coach, etc. And where this term Solomon's paradox comes from is it's actually named after King Solomon from the Old Testament. So King Solomon, who lived around 900 years BC, so this would be 900 years before Christ, he was considered, and in the scripture, in the Bible, he's considered, well, first he was the third leader of the Jewish, consolidated kingdom at that time. So I guess it was multiple tribes that he was the king of. And he was considered a sage and a man of wisdom. There's one story that I've known for many years that I believe is attributed to Solomon, where two women came in and they both claimed that this baby, a relatively newborn or very young child, was their child. And so they had a dispute of whose baby it was, and they went to King Solomon. So King Solomon, known for his wisdom, said that people would travel great distances to seek his advice or his ability to, mediate. And so he's considered a very wise and great judge of character, etc. So what's Solomon's paradox, and what's less well known, is that even though he was so great at helping other people, his own personal life was actually very different. So apparently, he made a lot of bad decisions personally. He had uncontrolled passion for money and women. He had only one son who inherited the kingdom, and he neglected to actually instruct that son. So that son ended up being a bad ruler and ruined the kingdom. So that's why it's called Solomon's paradox, because here was Solomon, considered by all to be a man of great wisdom and thoughtfulness, who in his own personal life actually was not able to use this ability that he had. And so I think Solomon's paradox is so interesting because it's a guide for all of us in that we can use help. And so whether I'm, for example, in my case, whether I'm an advisor, a financial advisor, acting as a personal investment and financial coach, or I'm working with someone and I'm helping them on business advice as an entrepreneur, giving them some advice on personal matters, Solomon's paradox actually explains why most of us could get a lot of value by having somebody other than ourselves look at our situation from the outside and be able to basically add tremendous value to us. So actually, going back to the story of the two women, so in the case of Solomon, to show kind of, this is a story about how wise he was. So both women claimed that the baby was theirs. Solomon had to decide who to give custody to. So he said, oh, well, let's just split the baby. And one of the women immediately says, no, I don't want the baby, give it to the other woman. And so that's the story of, how he decided that actually the woman that didn't want the baby in that situation, because she cared more about the baby than she cared about her possession, that was the real mother. And so he awarded custody to that woman. But here he was a very wise man. There's many other stories, I'm sure. But in his own personal life, he couldn't really apply his wisdom. And it had a lot to do with the vantage point. When he was outside looking at other people's situation, he was able to see clearly and use his judgment. Whereas on his own personal life, he was not so fortunate. And so and this is the idea of Solomon's paradox, even Solomon himself, as wise and as sage as he was, could have benefited. Unfortunately, he didn't really realize this. He could have benefited from having someone else in his life who could have advised him or coached him or given him the benefit of that third party view. So obviously this is the story of Solomon is from, several thousand, almost 3,000 years ago. But it's interesting that it's just as relevant today in the 21st century. And it's not so much just his story, but the fact that there is this thing called Solomon's paradox. So to update it, there was a psychology professor at the University of Waterloo, this is in Ontario, Canada, who set up a series of experiments to see if people fell into Solomon's paradox today. And what he found, what he did was he basically asked people to imagine that, they and their partner were subject to infidelity by the other person and how they would handle it. And so it's very interesting that when they told them that it was their friend who was in this situation, and then they asked them to sort of judge the advice that what advice or what would they do or what would they recommend, they were able to actually stay clear-headed and actually give advice to this other friend. But those same people, if it was their own situation, according to various metrics in this study, they were not able to stay clear-headed, and then so they ended up not actually having the same level of wisdom, not making the same level of clear-headed decisions. So this study, which wasn't that long ago, was within the last 10 or 15 years, actually shows that Solomon's paradox is just as true today as it ever was. And so we could all benefit if we're aware of this issue. And actually, the study went further. So then they actually, so how do you get around Solomon's paradox? Well, obviously, one of the ways is to seek out mentors and coaches and advisors who can play for us that position of a third party. Of course, look for people who have wisdom, have education, have experience. All of those things are important, but also recognize that there's something about just the privileged position that you're asking them to be in, to be a third party from the outside looking in. Just that alone, plus those other qualities that they hopefully have, can help you tremendously to avoid mistakes, to make better decisions, to reach your goals much faster, much quicker, much more efficiently. So all of these benefits that can accrue from having advisors and coaches because of Solomon's paradox. Now, the other interesting thing is that if you don't have the benefit of a third party, which I think most of us can or would, there's one thing you can personally do, which is that they were able to find in these studies that even some psychological distance gives you some of the benefits, not all of the benefits of having a third party, but some of the benefits. So basically, the study showed that if the person was asked to sort of look at their own situation from outside themselves and ask them questions like, given this situation that he is in, what should he do? Giving themselves that psychological distance actually did lead to better and wiser decision making, even if without the benefit of a third party. So another interesting aspect of this study was also to look at this idea that wisdom comes with age. And they asked them several kinds of scenarios, again, involving the same sort of general case study around infidelity. And they did it with different groups of people who are young, which the study considered to be 20 to 40, versus an older group, 60 to 80. And they found that actually wisdom does not, at least in those domains, necessarily come with age. So while age does help with experience, it doesn't always lead to wisdom or better decision making. So given all of this, I realized once I learned about Solomon's paradox that all of us could benefit if we seek out very good coaches and advisors, whether that be in personal matters, whether that be in finances and investments, or whether that be in sports, like many people already do, especially the highest performance athletes, or even in business and entrepreneurship. All of us can benefit because of Solomon's paradox from having somebody outside of ourselves ideally with education, wisdom, and experience who can look at the situation we're in and help guide us and see more clearly the options in front of us and guide us to make better decisions and avoid mistakes that all of us can make without the benefit of this third-party perspective. Hope this was interesting for you. If you liked the video, please do me a favor and hit the bell or hit subscribe so you're informed when we put out other videos. If you did like it, please also hit the like, because it helps us tell YouTube that this type of content is good and helps our channel grow and flourish. And also, as additional things, if you like the topic, Google Solomon's Paradox. There's a lot of great information on the internet. And find yourself a good coach or advisor who can help you unlock some of the log jams that hold you back. Hope this was interesting. See you next time. Thanks a lot.